So Pastor Matt, if you remember, we did a book about 2.5, nearly 3 years ago called The God of the Underdogs. And I got the book in the mail and I started reading and I thought, man, Fusion Church is the underdog church in this area because we were the little church that could during Hurricane Sandy, and started reading his book and I thought, man, this is good stuff. And so I thought, well, let's go ahead and let's do the book as a group and as a church and see what's going on. And so in the process of that, God began to work in crazy ways here at Fusion Church. And then my wife and I took a trip down to Austin, Texas, to be at a kind of small gathering of pastors and their wives. And we walk in the front door, and there is Pastor Matt and his wife, Sarah Keller. And literally, I had our promotional material of God of the Underdogs in my Bible. I whipped it out, and I said, I got it right here. And it was a circle card that we had given out. And so Pastor Matt is a people builder. He loves to build people. And with more than 20 years of building people, he can speak into so many people's lives. A few months after that, I heard one of his greatest teachings called Making the Jump, and he teaches the S-curve. And so as we were talking about him coming out, I said, I would love for you to teach that to this church so that we could get what God is doing in the community. Not only is he just a people builder, but he's a pastor, author, speaker, leadership coach, amazing dad to his 2 boys, incredible husband to his wife, Sarah, that helps co-lead at Next Level. And they're located in Fort Myers, Florida. They've got 2 campuses, and on the same weekend, in the same theater chain in Coconut Point, Florida, they are opening their 3rd campus. So let's get excited about that. Along with that, Pastor Matt also is the founder and leader of Next Level Coaching, which I'm a part of, and that coaches just a huge group of pastors around the country, online and then in personal gatherings. And I wanted to say that literally has changed my life over the last 2 years as I've been connected with Pastor Matt. And so I asked him to come and be a part of our church, tell us how we can be better. I think we should always be teachable in those ways. And so tonight, you've got the piece of paper in front of you. This teaching can apply to your marriage. It can apply to your business. It can apply to the department that you oversee. It can apply to so many places. And so my prayer is that you just wouldn't see it as a church strategy, because it is significantly, but that's a strategy to your life, because none of our lives is like this. It's always like this. Amen? So come on, church, let's put our hands together and let's welcome Pastor Matt Keller.
Well, what is up, Fusion Church? I feel like I'm among friends and family. Man, it's great to see you. It is great to be here. And I just want you to know, as Pastor Brennan said, he has been a part of our coaching for the last couple of years. And you know how when you meet some people sometimes, like there are just some people that from the moment you meet them, and for us that was in Austin, Texas, they just got it, right? Like you just, you know what I'm talking about? Like you just meet some people and you're like, they're awesome. Well, when Sarah and I met Pastor Brendan and Danielle, like that's how we felt. Like, you know, because that's probably how you felt, okay? But I will say this, I feel like he's cheating. Because when it comes to church growth, I have this sort of mix of born in Indiana / moved to Florida 14 and a half years ago accent. There's no advantage to that. And then Pastor Brennan gets up here and he's got this cool South African accent. And if that's not any, hires Tom, who's got this British thing going. I'm like, it's cheating. You're cheating at church growth. It's not fair. Unbelievable. So from here on out, my friends, I shall teach thee like this. Deal? Deal. That's the best I got, Tom. That's the best I've got. But I did a little time in musical theater, and so every once in a while it just sort of flows out of me, and I decide, okay. It's kind of how it's more of an okay than an okay. Anyway, sorry, once I get going, it just goes. All right, stop. All right, so here's the deal. I have ADHD. First thing you need to know. Second thing you need to know, I took my pill. Third thing you need to know, it's a 12-hour pill, and I took it exactly 11 hours and 45 minutes ago. So in about 15 minutes, we're going to have a good time. So I am so glad that you're here. As Pastor Brendan said, my wife and I moved from the only home we had ever known in Indiana 14 and a half years ago to start Next Level Church. We had no clue what we were doing. We had $9,200 to our name, which is not a lot of money to start a church, by the way. And no clue. And the fellowship we were part of kind of blacklisted us. They gave us the left foot of fellowship. Do you know what I'm talking about? The Apostle Paul says in Scripture, we extended the right hand to fellowship. No, we got the left foot. And they said, y'all go ahead. Don't call us. We'll call you. And we're still waiting for them to call. But that's okay because God's been faithful and God's been good. So we started our church on Mother's Day, second worst day ever to start a church, topped only by Time Change Sunday in March. Don't do it. Don't do it. I'm just telling you. I have literally talked to church planners because we coach a lot of them, and I'm like, when's your launch date? And they're like, March 13th. I'm like, no, it's not. Do not launch your church on Time Change Sunday. I don't even want to come to church on Time Change Sunday. Like, don't do it. So anyway, we started on Mother's Day, May the 12th, 2002, and we started in a movie theater. I know. How cool is that? You wouldn't think it's possible to do church in a movie theater, but we did. And I think you know a little something about that. So we did exactly 200 Sundays in a movie theater and then moved into a brand new 900-seat auditorium and a $40 million state-of-the-art high school, South Fort Myers High School, and did the next 5 years there. So we were 9 years portable. We ended up being one of the largest, longest-running portable churches in America. And we loved it. And then 5 years ago, God opened the door for us to buy an existing church about 2 miles up the same road that the high school was on. And so we had about 1,000 people in attendance at the time, and we purchased that facility, gutted it, renovated it, added square footage to it, and on Easter Sunday 2011, we moved in. And I like to say, for our story, after 9 years of kind of being up the middle, 1 yard at a time kind of a church, we were an idea whose time had come in our city. And in 9 months of moving into that facility, our church literally doubled. We went from just under 1,000 people in average weekly attendance to just over 2,000. And it was an incredible, amazing, best of times, worst of times, as Charles Dickens says. And we've learned so much over the years. And so 2.5 years ago then, we launched our second campus. So we purchased some acreage out about 20 minutes away. Sound familiar? And we started a second location out there, built it from the ground up. And so now today, as Pastor Brendan said, we have 2 campuses. And then on the same day you're launching, we're going back to a movie theater at a mall called Coconut Point. So you be praying for us, and we'll be praying for Mays Landing because God is expanding His kingdom. So my heart is for the local church. And I love being in churches like Fusion Church because you are an underdog church. You're a church that said, you know what? We're not going to take no for an answer. And we just believe that what God is capable of doing in South Jersey and in this region is greater than the naysayers. And God wins, and I love that. So here's what I want to do. As Pastor Brendan said, he asked me to give a talk that I have literally had the privilege of giving to tens of thousands of leaders over the last nearly decade of time. And so whatever you lead, if you lead a family, if you're leading a marriage, if you lead a small group, if you lead a department here at the church, this is team night, if you lead a church, if you're a pastor that's come in or you're on staff here, if you lead a department or a team at your workplace, or if you own your own business, I think what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes is going to be applicable to you and in all of those different ways, because we're going to talk about how organizations, teams, businesses, churches grow. And the reason why this is so paramount, the reason why Pastor Brendan said, man, you got to be here at this time for this team night, is because all of you are in the middle of making the jump. So here's what we know. I've got some slides that are going to help us here. When we think about how organizations grow, we often think that they grow in a straight line. And so when we think of church growth, and I'll keep saying church, but again, you plug in whatever team, department, small group, organization, business you lead and run and work at, okay, we think that it's a straight line. But the truth is, what we've discovered is that organizations, churches don't grow in just a straight line. They actually grow in a series of S-curves. A series of S-curves. It really actually looks like this. That it's an S-curve. And so here's what we've discovered. What we've discovered is what gets us to the top of one phase of growth cannot, will not, and should not get us to the top of the next phase of growth. That everything we have done cannot, will not, and should not be as effective in the next season. But we humans are prone to habits, aren't we? We're prone to what worked in the past ought to work in the future. But the message tonight is what got you here most probably won't get you there. And oftentimes what we've discovered in working with hundreds of businesses and churches and so forth over the years is that oftentimes the strength of one phase becomes the weakness in the next phase. So it's important for us to understand the kind of the engine, the mechanism of how organizations grow. So on the S-curve, you'll notice there that there are really 5 segments to a phase of growth. So again, whatever you lead, there are what we would consider to be 5 segments to a growth phase of, let's say, a local church like Fusion. The first is what we like to call the launch segment. The launch segment, and you'll see this is kind of the first little dip. And so any church planters, if you've ever started anything, any entrepreneurs, if you've started your own business or whatever in the past, you know that there's kind of this launch segment, right? And to use a roller coaster as an illustration, right? There's kind of this first sort of getting the thing going. And anybody like roller coasters? Show of hands. Okay, good for you guys. You'd like my wife. Okay, I don't like roller coasters. I like to read. But once or twice a year, my wife is like, come on, we have 2 teenage boys. And she's like, come on, be a man, be a good example to the kids and go on the roller coaster with me. Fine, okay? So I do it reluctantly, not because I'm a good dad, but because I'm a good husband. So I go, and so we go up to, Busch Gardens in Tampa or whatever the case may be. And you stand in the long, hot, sweaty line, and they got the misters, and you finally get there. And so once you get in, what's the first thing you do? Well, for me, I put on the seatbelt, I buckle it as tight as it'll possibly go, and then there's that lap bar, right? And I push it down, and you push it down as far as it'll go, and then what do? You suck it in, and you're like, it's only 2 minutes and 20 seconds, I can get it down, click, one more click, right? Okay, so then as soon as everybody gets in, some teenage guy on a microphone that's barely legible comes on, and he says what? Please keep all hands, arms, legs inside the car at all times. Please enjoy your day here at Busch Gardens, right? You can't even understand it, but you're like, okay, got it. I'm safe now. Thank you for that briefing. Awesome, right? Okay, and then what happens? As soon as everybody's buckled in and the mid-pubescent teenager says what he says and we can't understand, the very next thing that happens is what? The air brakes release. And the roller coaster car comes out of the starting chute, and there's always that little first dip, right? That launch segment. And it's in that moment that I push the bar down even further. And that's the moment where my wife's going, whoa, this is awesome. Okay, and here's the deal. Anytime we venture into something new, a new phase of growth, there's always going to be those first 6 to 8 weeks, those first 6 to 8 months, right? It's like when you bring the newborn home from the hospital. Come on, parents, where you at, right? And you literally think we're dead. We will never sleep again. Our life as we know it is over. Right? That's the launch segment of parenting. Mays Landing crowd, those of you who are going out to Mays Landing, and let me tell you something, we need a lot of you to go to Mays Landing. Okay, come on. If you're undecided, if you're on the fence, if you're like, I'm about 9 minutes between either one, okay, go that way. You know why? Because let me tell you something, every seat we empty here, the Lord's going to fill up again. Promise, 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 promise. I promise. It's just going to happen. Okay? So we need you. We need you at Mays Landing because you get what we're doing. You get the vision of Fusion. So get on out there and be an evangelist, and let's get on the mission field called Mays Landing, and let's rock and roll, okay? So, launch segment, Mays Landing group, you're going to feel this. You're going to feel that, okay, and this is where you kind of look around and you're like, is it going to work? Are we going to die, right? That's the launch segment, right? But then the second segment of a growth phase is what we call the acceleration segment. And sure enough, after 6 or 8 weeks or 6 or 8 months, hopefully not 6 or 8 years, we start to get our sea legs under us, right? Back to the roller coaster. This is the moment where the clicking starts. And what for a few short moments was this sort of uneasy, we're coming out of the starting chute and we're, oh boy, what's going on? You kind of go around the little corner, right? And then the roller coaster car hooks on the chain. And when it hooks on the chain, click, 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 you start to accelerate. And I'm telling you, right? Think about it. Parents, marriages, entrepreneurs, department heads, those first 6 or 8 weeks or whatever feel real fuzzy, but then you start to go, oh, we can do this. Oh, okay, 4 weeks into your small group, you're like, oh, we got this. Oh, all right. This isn't as intimidating as I thought. We got this. That's the acceleration segment. But then what comes after that? That is the rapid growth segment of a growth phase. And every time a church or an organization grows, this is how it looks. It's the rapid growth segment. Now, here's what you'll notice. Leave that up there for a second, guys, because what you'll notice is the rapid growth segment in a growth phase is a straight line. This is the up and to the right part, right? Like, this is the part that starts to trick us, doesn't it? This is where we start to look around and go, we got the Midas touch? Like everything, like what attendance numbers are up, offerings are up, kids ministries bursting at the seams, everything is great. I remember when we were in the movie theater and we were about 18, 20 months old, and Mike, the guy who started the church with me, we just had this amazing, amazing weekend service. It was just incredible. God's presence was there, great preaching, if I do say so myself. Everything, it was just awesome. It was just a great weekend. I'm standing by the popcorn counter at the theater. You'll get that in about 2.5 weeks. And Mike comes up, and I'm just shaking hands, high-fiving people, and Mike comes up to me and he goes, dude, because that's what you say back in the early 2000s, dude, this is awesome. And here's what he said, no lie. He goes, we can do that forever. Yeah. Like literally, we had probably 150, 180 people at the time in attendance. Like literally that night in our team meeting, it was like, get ready for 1,000. It's got like 1,000 by Easter. Like, dude, we got this. Like, right? Like, why? Because it's up and to the right. And this is the moment where you start to look around and go, it's working. It's clicking. It's amazing. But then comes the fourth segment of a growth phase. And that's what we call diminishing returns. Diminishing returns. And here's what happens. All of a sudden, unbeknownst to us, we're doing all the same things. We're working just as hard, if not harder. And yet, all of a sudden, things have stalled out. All of a sudden, things are flat. Wait, revenue's flat? Wait a second. Wait, who's leaving? Who's upset with us? Who doesn't? Wait. How far down were the offerings this week? That's a little inside pastor joke there. We're doing all the same things. And yet somehow we feel like we're getting diminishing returns. And this is where, in spiritual leadership circles, this is where we start to question God. This is where we start to ask, has the glory departed? This is where we start to use Old Testament words like Ichabod. This is when. But watch this. Here's what we need to understand. The fifth segment of a growth phase is what we call the free fall segment. The free fall segment. And this is the dotted line. Okay, to go back to the roller coaster illustration, guess what? Here's what happens. We're riding up, click, 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 click. Everything's amazing. Woo, this is great. You get to the top. What happens? My wife's looking at me. She's like, come on, honey, hands up. And I'm looking at her going, I hate this. White knuckle in the bar in front of me, right? Woo, okay, we get up there and the view's amazing. We can see all of Tampa Bay from here. This is incredible, right? Click, 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 click. Silence. And literally, the wheels leave the track. You're looking straight down. Your stomach is coming into your throat. You feel like you're going to throw up. Anybody ever felt that way, business leaders? Come on, anybody. Come on, married couples, parents, church leaders. That's the free fall. And the primary emotion of the free fall segment of a growth phase is chaos. This is the moment you look around and you go, we're going to die. We're going to die. I remember when we were 4 years in the movie theater, 200 Sundays exactly, and then we moved to South Fort Myers High School. And I remember we moved in on Easter. It was March, April of 2006. And by August, September, July, August, we had people who had left our church, and it's not the same anymore. We're like, no, it's better. Like, what are you talking about? Okay, and all of that whiny stuff that they did, and we had bottomed out. And literally, I remember laying in bed one night, it was like 2 a.m, and my wife literally said to me, do you think the movie theater would take us back? Like, we thought we killed our church. That's what it feels like in the free fall. And some of you right now, 4 services, Maze Landing, everything's changing at Fusion, and you're looking around and you're going, this looks like chaos, and what are we going to do? And it's not the same anymore. Right. It's not supposed to be. But watch this. Here's what happens. So many times when we hit diminishing returns and free fall, which, by the way, every healthy growing organization must go through diminishing returns and free fall. There is no such thing as a straight line. It's a myth. I was teaching this to a group of about 80 or 100 pastors in Alabama several years ago, and I taught at my morning session, and I got done, and we were having this lunch break, and they were serving Chick-fil-A, Christian fast food. You wouldn't think Jesus had a preferred fast food, but apparently he does. And shame on us if Chick-fil-A closed on Sundays is following the 10 Commandments better than we are. Sabbath isn't a suggestion, it's a command. Husbands, wives, don't let the fast food chain be more spiritual than you. We're sitting there eating Chick-fil-A at this thing, and this pastor, God bless him, walks up to me, and there's an empty chair, and he goes, "Can I sit down? Can I talk to you, ask you a question?" "Yeah." And he sits down, and I'm eating my sandwich, and he goes, "Okay, if a leader is really strategic, is it possible," and I mean, he's wanting the right answer, "to skip over diminishing returns and free fall?" And I take like another bite of my sandwich. I'm looking down, and I look up at him, and I go, "No." "But if a leader's really strategic," and I'm like, "Buddy, no, I'm telling you, you know why? Because this is how healthy organizations grow. We must go through diminishing returns and free fall. The problem is when we feel chaos, when the wheels leave the track, what the vast majority of leaders do is they circle back and they say to themselves, go ahead with the slide, "We just need to go back and do what worked before. Abandon ship, call it off. We just need to go back to what worked before." And Jim Collins, in his legendary book, Good to Great, calls this the doom loop. This is the doom loop. This is why 85% of churches in America are below 150 in attendance. Because they can't seem to break out. They can't seem, in the midst of the chaos and the free fall and the diminishing returns, they can't seem to to stop asking the question, what do we need to go back to? And instead, next slide, they need to start asking the question, what do we need to start looking forward to? True visionary leadership looks across the S-curve from one S-curve of growth to the next in the midst of, notice where the X is, in the midst of the Midas touch, in the midst of the rapid growth, in the midst when everything is going great. That's the moment where leaders and organizations need to look across and start asking different questions. What priorities, skill sets, disciplines, and temptations do we need to start thinking about now to be ready for then? And you guys are blessed with an amazingly wise and God-gifted leader in Pastor Brendan and Danielle. Because this is a leader who is asking these questions. This is a leader who's calling me. Well, I know where I was. I was sitting in the parking lot of a mall in Orlando, he schedules this meeting with me, and Sherry's like, "Matt's going to be traveling. It's okay. Can he be on the phone?" "Yeah, great." So I'm sitting in this parking lot. He's calling me. For an hour and 15 minutes, we sat in the parking lot, I did, and we had this conversation, and you know what he's asking me? These questions. What do I need to know? What do we need to get ready for? Multiple campuses, what do I need? You know what? He's asking the right questions. And God is setting up Fusion Church to make the jump from one S-curve of growth to the next, which brings us to the question, well, then what are those questions? What are those things we need to start thinking about? Well, here's what we've discovered. If you think I'm talking fast, I am. Because I heard a statistic one time that the mind can actually hear and process faster than most humans can speak. And I'm like, dude, I'm in. Because I can talk fast. If you can listen fast, I can talk fast. So let's go. 6 invisible keys. 6 invisible keys. Here's what we realize. We realize that there are 6 invisible, what we call invisible indispensables to making the jump. For an organization, a marriage, a family, a small group, a department, or a church to go from one S-curve of growth to the next, they need to be thinking about 6 invisible indispensables. Does anybody see the movie? This is a long time ago, 13, 15 years ago, called The Sixth Sense. Remember that movie with Bruce Willis, The Sixth Sense? Okay, well, if you haven't seen it, spoiler alert. Like, I'm about to tell you the ending, but listen, here's the deal. I feel no guilt in that. You had 15 years, okay? That's not on me. That's you, okay? That is you. I remember my wife and I were on vacation in Chicago, Illinois, and we were in one of those movie theaters, like on the 18th floor of this high-rise. It was really cool, and we go to see The Sixth Sense. And so we're sitting there watching, and literally for the first hour and 45 minutes, if you remember the movie, I'm sitting there going, I hate this movie. This movie's so confusing. I have no idea what's going on right now. I'm so confused. And I don't know, there's people and Bruce Willis and some little kid, Haley Joel Osment or whatever. They're like, what is going on? For an hour and, like, I almost left. Like, hour and 45 minutes. I hated that movie. And then all of a sudden, the little kid, Haley Joel Osment, goes, I see dead people. And as soon as he says, here's a spoiler, as soon as he says, I see dead people, you realize, oh, Bruce Willis is a dead guy. And I went from, I hate this movie, to, this is the best movie I've ever seen. Bruce Willis is a dead guy. Oh my gosh, this is the greatest movie. Well, what was that? The understanding the fact that Bruce Willis is a dead guy for the entire movie was an invisible indispensable. It was invisible to the naked eye, and it was indispensable to the plot line. Well, what we've discovered is there are 6 invisible indispensables that to the naked eye in a church, to the naked eye in a business or an organization, that you can't see them necessarily. But when a leader or a leadership team, like all of you, Team Night here at Fusion, really start to hone in and think about these 6 things, what begins to happen is churches, departments, teams, organizations go to the next level. They make the jump from one S-curve of growth to the next in 9 to 18 months. And we've literally seen hundreds and hundreds of businesses, organizations, churches make the jump and double, triple, quadruple simply by putting these principles into their thought processes. So what are the 6 invisible keys? Well, here's the first one. Number 1, we have to combat complacency. If you and I are going to start thinking about what we have to do to make the jump, the first thing we have to do is we have to combat complacency. We have to look on at our organization, our church, and start to ask the question, where are the pockets of complacency? I mentioned I'm from Indiana. I was born and raised there, and so we grew up watching Indiana basketball. And so my dad was a big Indiana basketball fan, and so he coached us in Little League. One of the first things my dad taught us about playing basketball is when you're on defense, you got to stay on the balls of your feet. You got to stay on the balls of your feet, because when you're guarding your man, if you rock back on your heels, you're done. But if you stay on the balls of your feet, if he shoots, you can jump to block it. If he passes, you can step in the passing lane to get the ball. If he dribbles, you can move and guard him and stay with him. But the minute you rock back on your heels, he's going to school you and go around you, and you're done. Well, the exact same thing is true in leading our organizations. It takes so much energy, it takes so much work, it takes so much dedication and courage to climb to the top of an S-curve of growth, whatever that looks like in your world or in our church. That once we reach the top, there's this subtle sort of unconscious rocking back on our heels. And we go, it's good enough. We're paying the bills, keeping the lights on. Services seem pretty full. What's the problem? Well, the problem is that within a 5 or 10 or 20 or 50 mile radius of where you and I sit tonight are hundreds of thousands of people who, if they died tonight, would enter into a Christless eternity. And that's not okay. So what does that mean? It means that God's church has to stay on the balls of our feet. It means that God's church has got to stay agile and stay ready and ready to move, ready to go forward, okay? So if I were to spend a month at your church, what I would be looking for, following Pastor Brendan and the team around and all of you around, I would be looking for pockets, is what we call them, pockets of complacency. Where have we rocked back on our heels? Who on your team has just gotten... It's good enough. Could be better, but we're good. So what do we do? What do we do when we find pockets of complacency on our team? And for those of you who lead a team at work or whatever, departments here at the church, let me give you a couple of thoughts. The first thing is we have to create some new first downs. To use a football analogy, we need to create some new first downs. Now, notice I didn't say Hail Marys and long bombs, which is what most leaders tend to do, right? We need to do a 50,000, okay, maybe not. What we need to do is say, here's the next 10 yards. Let's go get that first down. Here's the next 10 yards. Let's go get that first down. We don't need a 65-yard Hail Mary to the back of the end zone. Those seldom work, and even if they do, we couldn't keep the people if they came because we're not ready. So what do we do when we find pockets of complacency? Number one, we have to create some new first downs, not Hail Marys or long bombs. And number two, we have to create true urgency, not false urgency. John Cotter, who is a Harvard Business Press author, wrote a book called A Sense of Urgency several years ago. And in that book, he talks about true urgency and false urgency, and he puts them on a continuum. And he basically says, dangerous is the leader who is constantly running into his team creating false urgency. The building's on fire. We're all going to die. Or everybody gets fired if we don't. Okay, here's the deal, leaders. That will work once or twice. But if the only urgency we're creating in our department or on our team or in our church is false urgency, everybody's going to die if we don't. Okay, eventually our credibility will quickly erode. So what is necessary for us to combat complacency is to create true urgency. When I stood up here and just told you that within a 5, 10, 20, 50-mile radius, there are hundreds of thousands of people who would enter into a Christless eternity, every one of you were moved by that. You know why? Because that's true urgency. So what do we have to do? 6 invisible keys. Number one, we have to combat complacency. Number two, we have to download DNA. We have to download DNA. How do you and I make the jump from one S-curve of growth to the next? It's important for us then to download DNA. And what I'm talking about is vision. Vision. The only way for a team to be most effective in reaching their full potential is when everyone on that team is seeing and executing the same vision. We're going after the same goal. Let's play a game tonight real quick. Okay, here you go. Close your eyes just for a second, okay? Picture in your mind's eye a sunset. Right now, picture in your mind's eye a sunset, okay? Can you see it? What's around you? Where are you? What's the scenery like? What are the sounds, the smells, the sights? Okay, open your eyes. Here's the deal. If we started going around the room tonight, we'd start to hear different descriptions of sunsets. I was born and raised in Indiana, so for me, when I think about an Indiana sunset, I think about red barns with basketball hoops on the side and cornfields. Everywhere, cornfields. Because that's what an Indiana sunset looks like, right, with the sun setting, okay? I live in Fort Myers, Florida now. And so my sunset now is Fort Myers Beach or Sanibel Island. And the sun is setting. There's a restaurant right on Fort Myers Beach, and the sun sets. It's beautiful right over the boardwalk. And there's the pier, and then Sanibel Island's in the distance, and there's oranges and there's blues. Okay, so here's the deal. Maybe if you were raised in the mountains, your sunset has mountains in it, and you see mountains. Maybe if you live in Ocean City, yours has the rooftops and the sun setting over the new bridge that was just built a few years ago. Okay, now here's the deal. Whose sunset is right? Whose sunset is wrong? Well, nobody, everybody. But there's no right or wrong sunset, right? So here's the deal. When I say church, what do you think of? Whose definition of church is right? Whose is wrong? Watch this. God has called Fusion Church to paint a very specific picture of a sunset on the canvas of your community. And the way this church reaches its full redemptive potential in God is when all of us, team night, are painting the same picture. Imagine how awful the picture would look if all of us had one canvas and all never talked and just painted whatever sunset picture we see in our mind. It would be a mess. And yet, how many churches in America are doing that? So what picture do we paint? Can I tell you what picture we paint? We paint the picture that is in the heart and mind of Pastor Brennan and Danielle. Not because they see it best, but because they see it first. And according to Scripture, the anointing flows down. So, here's what that means. That means it's their job to download the DNA, the vision, the picture they see in their heart, mind, and spirit to all of you. You know why? Because you hold the brushes. The way a local church reaches its maximum effectiveness is when we're all painting the same sunset. And that's true for the church. It's true for your department. It's true for worship. It's true for student ministry. It's true for guest relations and hospitality. Everything we do as a church, listen, there is a very specific picture that God wants Fusion Church to paint on the canvas of your community. And the way Fusion becomes the most possibly effective it can possibly be is when we're all painting the same picture. So it's Brendan and Danielle's job to download that DNA into all of you. And it's your job to figure out how to get inside their head so that you can say, well, what does it look like? What does it look like? Not because theirs is better than anybody else. No. But simply because God, in His divine order in church, makes it flow like that. That's how it works. It just is. That's just how it's done. And if that is concerning to you, well, when you create your universe, you can do whatever you want. Until then, we live in God's universe, and He says it flows down, so that's kind of just how we're going to have to do it. Sound good? Number three. I told you we'd have fun. My pill has worn off. Have you noticed? I haven't even looked at the notes. Like, I'm just rolling. Like, this is a good time. Number three, we have to shift our staff. If you and I are going to make the jump from one S-curve of growth to the next, it always requires shifting at least one key leader or staff member. And can I tell you something? In teaching this for almost 10 years now, I hate this point. I wish I only had 5, but I don't. There are 6. And number 3 is shift your staff. Every single time, Next Level Church over the years, and I teach the STAR staff about 2 to 3 times a year because there's always new things we see, new perspectives, because we're always at a different place in our vision and on the S-curve. And every time we do, we get to the, and it's that we've never, ever seen this with us or the hundreds of organizations we work with that haven't had to shift at least one or more key leaders. Sometimes we shift them to different seats on the bus, and sometimes we have to shift them off the bus. And it's our responsibility then as pastors and leaders in God's church to pastor people well, even if it means walking them and pastoring them to the door. We do that with grace, love, and mercy. That's how we do that. Here's what we say in our coaching. Your department, your organization, your church is 2 hard conversations away from a whole new level of existence. And leaders, you already know who they are. If you lead a small business, your business is 2 hard conversations away from a whole new level. And right now, 2 things have just happened to you. Your stomach is turning, and you see their face in your mind. 2 hard conversations away from your department going to a whole new level, from your church going to a whole new level. And we already know who they are. And here's the reason why. Because as organizations grow, what inevitably begins to happen is gaps begin to form. Let me illustrate this. So when organizations grow, okay, so let's say the top line is the organization's growth. Matt, I thought you said it wasn't a straight line. Come on, stay with me, okay? So the top line is the organization's growth. So watch this. As an organization grows, if it's growing at that pace and that level, if there's an individual inside of it, the bottom line, and they're not growing at the same pace as the organization is growing, for a while, back on the left side of the graph, that gap is acceptable. And so here's what happens. That leader's not keeping up, and the gap is, but in those days, it's okay. That's just Johnny. You know, we love him, and it's cool. He's kind of quirky, which is a Christian word for weird, but it's cool. And we just cover over it, right? But watch this. As an organization grows, if the leaders within it are not growing at the same pace, eventually the gap gets so wide that it becomes unacceptable. And here's what begins to happen. When that gap widens to such a degree that it's unacceptable, people in the organization, when they notice a gap in Johnny, they stop looking at Johnny and they start looking at Matt. And they start saying things like, well, Matt must not be a very good leader if he can't see the gap, or worse, he does see it and is refusing to deal with it. And in church work, watch what happens. In your team, in your department, watch. When there is a gap on a team member that has formed and widened, and you're refusing to have the hard conversation and deal with it, your best leaders will ever so subtly and unconsciously start to push away from the table and say, this must not be a very organized team. This must not be a very well-led department. This must not be a very well-led church. And they will push their time, their energy, their manpower, their volunteerism, and their dollars slowly away from the table and say, I'm not going to contribute to that because it's not well led. If the leaders can't see the gap, or worse, see it and refuse to deal with it, I'm out. And any department that once 6 months ago, 9 months ago, 15 months ago had amazing leaders rising and flourishing and growing, but today is struggling and those leaders have all left and went to other departments, that's a sign that you've got a leader who's refusing to have a hard conversation with people who have a gap. In order for us to make the jump, we have to shift our staff. Number 4, in order for us to make the jump from one S-curve of growth to the next, we have to examine expectations. We have to examine expectations or embrace new expectations. And what I'm talking about, I'll stay in the church world here, is the expectations of new people. The expectations of new people. See, watch. Every time a church grows to a new level, the expectations of your visitors change. And so a church of 100 can get away with things that a church of 500 can't get away with. And a church of 500 can get away with things that a church of 1,000 can't get away with. A church of 100 can stand up like this on a weekend with one service that's half full, and they go, hey, if anybody wants to be a part of the Saturday morning breakfast group, Brother Bob, stand up. Just talk to Brother Bob. Right? Brother Bob will be out in the foyer. You just go and talk to Brother Bob. Okay, in a church of 100, and they're like, oh, Brother Bob, we need to go talk to Brother Bob, right? But in a church of 500, when someone's, okay, put yourself in the new person's shoes. Number 1, Brother Bob's kind of creeping me out. And number 2, there's no way in the world I'm going to go talk to him if I can even, number 3, find him. What works in the smaller faces cannot, will not, and should not work in the bigger faces. Well, guess what, Fusion? Your church at 800, 900, 1,000 is going to have to start thinking differently for 1,200, 1,300, 1,500, 1,800, 2,000. And again, you need to know you're blessed because those are exactly the kind of questions your pastor and their staff are asking right now. We have to shift that, and we have to put ourselves in the shoes of the new person. For you business leaders, here's how we would say that. The expectations of your new customers or clients begin to change. And when you're just one guy with a paintbrush and a truck in your painting company, the expectations on you are completely different than such and such painting company with 20 trucks and vans and 57 employees. Does that make sense? We have to know, wise is the leader who knows the expectations that are on them and their organization depending on the phase and level of growth that they find themselves in. Number five, we got to make the jump. We have to examine our environments. We have to examine our environments. This is the business teaching PowerPoint, which says enlarge your capacity. So I have to tweak the language when I teach business leaders. And so there you go. So business leaders, write down enlarge your capacity. Church leaders, write down examine your environments. Because in church work, it's about environments. Here's the deal. In our church, the majority of churches in America today are perfectly designed for the amount of people we presently have. Business leaders, your company is perfectly designed for the amount of customers and clients you presently have. And if we're going to make the jump, we have to start to see our environments from a different perspective, different lenses. And again, you're blessed because your pastors are doing that. They haven't taken no for an answer. They've said, listen, what's better than one service? 2. What's better than 2? 3. What's better than a really rickety old staircase going down to an unfinished basement? A brand new glass-lined, amazing wide staircase going down to a beautiful bottom level of the church. You know why? Because they're constantly examining environments. Examine environments. In 6 weeks, after 6 weeks, the environments of our church become invisible to us. And if you don't believe that's true, invite an unsaved friend, coworker, or neighbor to church with you next weekend. You will see this church and the vision of this church completely different. When you bring an unsaved coworker, friend, or neighbor, you'll be driving to church going, dear God, let Brendan Message be good. God, let him be funny this week. God, let it really just hit home this week. God, let the worship team just be incredible this morning. You know why? Because you'll see it through their eyes, not yours. So how do we make the jump? We have to examine our environments and enlarge our capacity. Business leaders, your business is designed to handle the customers you have. What would it look like to enlarge that? If your business doubled in the next 60 to 180 days, what would have to change? Where are your capacity lids? Think that through. And then finally, number six, I love teaching this stuff. How do we make the jump? We have to shift our thinking. We have to shift our thinking. We have to shift our thinking. In my family, we have 10 people in our family that live down in Southwest Florida with us now. I have 5 in my family, my wife, my 2 boys, and then my mother-in-law lives with us. My parents live in Cape Coral across the river from us, and then Sarah's aunt and so forth. And then at Thanksgiving, like her brother who lives in West Palm, he drives over. So there's about 10 or 12 of us. And so Thanksgiving for us pretty much looks like about 8 o'clock, my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law who loves to cook, they get up, they start milling around the kitchen, right? And with the information coming into the day, about 2 o'clock we're going to eat. Okay, that's what's been broadcast. I know, because I've learned, because I'm a smart guy. When they say 2 o'clock Thanksgiving we're going to eat, there ain't no way. It's going to be like 3:30 or 4. But here's the deal. Football's on, I don't care. If we eat at 3:30 or 4, I don't care. Right? Now, take my same 10 or 12 people in my family, and let's go to the Hilton that has the $39.95 Thanksgiving dinner, right? And we make a reservation for the 12 of us for 2 o'clock. If we get there at 2, and the hostess says, yeah, it'll be 3, man, 3:30-ish. Unacceptable, right? Why? Because it's totally different environments. At home, we're family, we're chill, it's cool. But when you go to the organization, no. My expectations have completely changed. Watch this. The food in both places is essentially the same. Turkey, mashed potatoes, dressings, right? Both places, they're going to serve the exact same food. What changes? The thinking in the delivery system. And when an organization or a church makes the jump from one S-curve of growth to the next, it is paramount that we, the leaders, shift our thinking about the delivery system of the food. The food is the same. The preaching of the message, the worship is the same, whether there's 100 people in the room or 1,000 people in 2 locations. The food doesn't change. How we deliver the food as a church has to change. Relationships matter, whether you're a church of 100 or a church of 1,000. How relationships are delivered is completely different in a church of 100 versus a church of 1,000. So what does that require? It requires us to shift our thinking as leaders. See, when it comes to organizational growth, relationships growth, departmental growth, church growth, it matters. It's not as simple as just doing more of the same to get ever-increasing results. It's not a straight line. It's a series of S-curves. So Fusion Church, thank you for letting me share with you. Here's what I want to do tonight. I want to pray a blessing over you. Will you allow me to do that? So maybe the worship team can come back at this moment. Would you stand with me? Come on, let's stand together tonight. Let's stand. I hope this was helpful. Hopefully this will give you some language. Language shapes culture. And so having a common vocabulary, a common glossary of terms like sunset, you'll never see it the same again, will you? Because now you can walk into the nursery department this weekend and go, hey, let me share some of the sunset. Let me tell you a little about what's going on in this day. Here's what we see. Here's what we want to do in the worship department. Here, let me paint some of the sunset for you, okay? Because that's our responsibility as leaders, right? So vocabulary shapes culture. Language shapes culture. In Fusion Church, this talk tonight will position all of you, several hundred leaders, to be in a place where you can speak a common language so you can truly make a difference in people's lives. Heavenly Father, thank you. Thank you for this amazing church that you have raised up for such a time as this. God, thank you for Pastor Brendan and Danielle. Lord, we are humbled to think that we get to be led by them. God, you could have chose anybody 4 years ago to come in and be the next lead pastors of this church. But God, you chose them. You reached down and grabbed them. You dropped this place in their heart and their mind. And God, our lives are eternally different because you did. And so Jesus, we pray protection over them, over their kids, over their family, over their cars, over their relationships, over their marriage. God, let just a supernatural unity of spirit be in the Wilson home, like unprecedented. Jesus, thank you for Fusion Church. God, thank you for these leaders that are in this place who would come and give themselves and sacrifice on a Wednesday night like this to encounter you and to receive, to get ready for what you've called us to. Jesus, we know that you have positioned Fusion Church in South Jersey to not just make a difference in Summers Point or Ocean City, but Lord, to make a difference in this entire region, starting here and Mays Landing and going all the way out, all the way out. Lord, I look forward to the day when there are 8, 10, 12, 15 campuses, that no one in this entire region would be more than 29 minutes drive time to a Fusion Church location where they can experience the presence of Jesus like we experienced tonight. God, that's what we're setting our heart to. Raise up Fusion Church, that the light of the gospel might invade dark places, I pray. Bless each of these, we ask in Jesus' mighty name. And everyone who agreed said, amen. Come on, let's celebrate Jesus.